Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Kristen Layton. I'm an education consultant with the New England Consortium on Deafblindness. And today we will be talking about our transition work through NEC and give a little bit of background on transition. So there's lots of familiar faces. I think we're a small group starting out. So I'll just I'll suggest that we can all maybe just briefly introduce ourselves, just say, your name and where you're from. So I'll start with the NEC team. Brenda, do you want to start off?
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. I'm Brenda Allaire. I am the lead educational consultant here at NEC, working with this wonderful team.
Tracy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Evans-Louiselli, Director of the New England Consortium on Deafblindness, and just also very, very fortunate to work with this wonderful team. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Damari?
Hi, everybody. My name is Damari, and I also work with NEC.
Great. Helene?
Hi, I'm Helene Gallagher, and I'm also an educational consultant in Vermont.
Terrific. Sonu?
Hi everyone, I'm Sonu Rangnekar. I'm the family specialist for Connecticut for NEC.
Wonderful. Okay, Anna.
Hi, I'm a teacher of the deaf and I'm based in Vermont.
Great, welcome. Terry. Hey, Terry.
Hi, I'm a teacher of the visually impaired with the Boston Public Schools.
Great, welcome. And Katie.
Hey everybody, I'm a homeschool parent in central Vermont to a daughter with combined vision and hearing loss. I'm looking forward to learning more.
Terrific. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining this afternoon. Oops, here's my screen. Just to give you an idea of how we'll spend the next, 45 minutes to an hour is we have, some content to share around sharing some essential components of a successful transition. So we'll talk a little bit about, what those are. And of course, those are directly also related to how NEC can support teams and families and individual students who are transitioning, and also, and sharing those NEC resources with everyone. So, and then at the end, but really we're a small group. So anytime if you have a question, feel free to, raise your, virtual hand or put something in the chat. Brenda, if you wouldn't mind maybe just monitoring the chat, because I can't really see it when I'm sharing my screen.
Of course, no problem.
Yeah, and then we can have a discussion, afterwards as well with any additional questions. So to start, I'm going to hand it off to Tracy just to give some background. We'll start with some background about NEC for those of you who are not familiar with NEC and the services that NEC provides. So Tracy, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. When we thought about our kickoff around our transition work, Kristen and I bounced a lot of ideas off, just trying to really think about, so why is transition so critically important for the population that we're talking about today? So we hope that that thread kind of is a constant as we go through the content. Just to make sure that we have a level playing field here today, we wanted to also make sure that everyone understands who we are and what we do. And basically, I know I'm preaching to the choir for many of you, but this is a recorded session. So we, again, want to make sure that people that join our work have an understanding of what we're all about. So we're a federal grant and we're funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP, O-S-E-P. And OSEP has a very strong focus around transition. And in this new grant that we were just awarded, transition has a really strong position in terms of our work. And we're really kind of stepping back and thinking about how we can connect with many of you that are out there and are really trying to come up with meaningful activities and rich opportunities for learning for your students or even your child. So that's really a big focus of our push on this new grant. And one of the reasons we're funded is to help states individually build their capacity, whether it's individual service providers or various state agencies that provide transition-related services, to really help build state capacity around serving the population of students we're talking about, whether it's 12 to 21 or 14 to 21. It really depends on different agencies and your perspective when people kind of look at that age range when we're talking about transition. And again, just reminding folks that the population that we serve includes children and youth. So that's infants up to the age of 21. In some situations, we do go beyond 21 if we have some strong participation by some state agencies. We can continue to cover students past kind of up to 22, age 22, depending on their state situation. And again, we work in the 5 states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Looking at those 5 states, I would also say that the agencies and the systems that address transition for this population are incredibly different, but they're also very, very similar as far as the things that they struggle with, whether it's staff changes or limited staff or limited resources or resources that sort of ebb and flow. So if you have some of that angst with your state, know that you are not alone, that many of your peers across the border are dealing with very, very similar struggles. So we're hoping that through this work that we can kind of help you navigate some of those difficult situations. So the whole notion of deafblindness, we spend a lot of time having to remind folks about the population of students that we're talking about. And typically when we use that term, people, who do they conjure up? The whole notion of Helen Keller, and think about a child that has really no residual vision and hearing, when in fact, most of you here know today that that's not really true when we're talking about this population. It's extremely rare, for example, that we work with children that have no residual vision and hearing. Does it happen? Absolutely, but the numbers are really much, much smaller than many people understand. So we like to really underscore the notion that deafblindness refers to any combined hearing and vision loss that significantly limits the child's ability to gather information and learn about people and activities and such in their environment. So it really has a very significant range. Next. So here's some key takeaways when we're talking about this population, and it really, again, varies sometimes when we're talking about based on age, but deafblindness really impacts the child's ability to gather information from people and the environment incidentally. So as many of you know, the students that you work with, even if they're teenagers and they might have a significant hearing loss and a mild vision loss, there are things that happen in that immediate classroom that many of our students don't detect. They don't really notice a person walking into the room or a facial expression, for example, on a peer, and sometimes they either don't notice it or they misinterpret. So a lot of that incidental information that typical learners pick up in a myriad of ways in the learning, in their classroom, at home, in the community, can be very, very different for the population that we're talking about. And we like to really underscore with folks is when we talk about deafblindness, it's not deaf plus blind. It's not additive. In fact, it's a very unique and complex disability. So when you're talking to administrators or trying to explain your student or your child, really getting them to understand that deafblindness is very unique. It's a disability that's a low incidence, but it really does stand alone as a very separate, distinct disability. This chart, again, we use a lot to to kind of show people the range of sensory abilities and conditions. So at the top of the chart is the classification of vision loss. And to the far right relates to brain-based visual impairment, often referred to as cortical or cerebral visual impairment. And then over to the left is a classification of hearing loss, and that could be a slight, mild situation, and again, more those brain-based conditions. So when you look at this chart, any child that falls into those boxes that are shaded either blue or gray or shaded, as depending on how you perceive them, I like to use this chart a lot to kind of show families actually where their child might be, because again, quite often people misunderstand what that term is. So it can also show families, depending on the situation for the child, and if a situation potentially is progressive, or if a situation has the ability to improve, it can show families sort of, again, that range of sensory abilities. The National Child Count is basically organized and coordinated by the National Center on Deafblindness, which is also funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. And it's known as NCDB, the National Center on Deafblindness. So they coordinate all of the data that comes in annually from each of the states. And again, that's from infants up to age 21. And they compile that information, and it's reported in the National Child Count of children and youth who are deafblind. So there's all kinds of data for your state that relates to the number of children, the ages, age range, the ideologies, the educational and living situations, whether they have an intervener or specialized personnel working with them. And so that data is compiled, and certainly one of the big pushes with OSEP over the last 5 years is looking at the number of children identified in the state or newly identified in the state. Because again, we can't provide services if we don't know who these children are, who these students are, and what their needs might be. So I'm just going to stop here. Terry has a question about the child count. Let me pull this up again. It just flipped off my screen. Should undocumented be added? Most parents are fearful of deportation. Wow, that is an excellent question, Terry. I'm so glad you asked that. Absolutely. And you can identify those students without even giving us their formal name. If we have their initials and we have your contact information, we can still include them in the child count, but there's no way we can identify that family. We don't know the town that they live in, and we certainly don't have contact information on that family, or certainly not an address. But you would be the conduit, if you will, the conduit of information to either the teen or to that family. We often find situations like that. So I'm really glad that you brought up that question. Now, to give you a little bit of picture of your state and where things kind of play out here, this shows each of the five states, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. We have over 530 children identified. And for today's content, if you could look at the breakout of in each of the states, it's the fourth bar to the right, or the bars that are indicated in green show the number of transition age children, students that we're talking about. And you can see those are not small numbers. And certainly Massachusetts has a very large number. And I think we had a big influx several years ago of newly identified kiddos, and they're not newly identified anymore, but you can see it's a very significant number when you look at the overall state. Connecticut also very large. Vermont looks large, but Vermont's numbers are low. So again, it really isn't that small. Typically, in most of the states, we run about 40 to 50% of the overall total state population when we're talking about transition age. And as students get into those high school years, it becomes even more important for us to make sure that they're provided the appropriate services and supports for transition.
Tracy, Katie also has a question in the chat.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not pulling that. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Do children with CDI and CAPD get counted in the NCDB child count? Yes. And how do children who are not in public school, homeschool, and private school get counted if they have no support from a state agency? Any parent, anyone can refer a child. Yeah, and absolutely anyone can refer a child. It's nice to see you, by the way, Katie. I'm up in the beautiful but very cold state of Vermont today. So, okay, next. All
Great.
right, take it from there, Kristen.
Yes, thank you, Tracy, for that background. And so as we'll jump into just talking about some basic information around transition, recognizing that you could take an entire semester course, possibly an entire year course, to cover the content around transition planning for youth with disabilities. So it's a very broad topic. So we'll just touch on a few things, and that those things are directly also related to how NEC can support transition teams through the process. So, why are transition services so important? I probably don't need to tell any of you that are on this call this, but for all students with disabilities, it's so important. Actually, for all students, talking about the future, planning for the future. The research tells us that it is important. And as you see on the screen, some of the research that's been conducted specifically on children that have a combined vision and hearing loss is, really makes us think that we have a lot of work to do. The fact that a lot of high school students who are deafblind and have additional disabilities are not enrolled in vocational education. So they're not getting the skills in high school that they need to move on. And that most adults with deafblindness are living at home with their families. And that's just, those are just two research points. I will tell you, there's not extensive research around transition specifically related to students with combined vision and hearing loss, but there is some. And again, what it's showing us is that, there are issues that we need to deal with. So not to focus, not to admire the problem, but to focus on the fact that there is also research telling us that if the transition process is looked at seriously, and if there's a collaborative approach, and if education meets adult service and people work together, that transition outcomes are much more successful and hopeful. So that is the foundation of why we're doing what we're doing, because we know this. The research is telling us that if we start early and we work together, the outcomes for kids are much more successful. So when we think about students that have a combined vision and hearing loss, what are the essential components that we want to think about? And again, the list is long, so these are just essentially highlights. And again, you can look at this as somewhat of a menu as well of what you can look for NEC for support with in the transition process. So the first one is very obviously the collaborative team approach. Transition requires the entire team, and it's not so different from when children are in early intervention and in school age, of course. However, transition, the team widens and broadens because there's that the adult service component, and there's that planning to get everything in place for what's going to happen next. So, of course, that team includes the student, the family, the education team, and representation from the adult and community services. I will just mention Helen Keller National Center is essentially the adult services side of supporting individuals who are deafblind. So NEC can support, as Tracy mentioned, students up to through transition age And we partner with Helen Keller National Center to support, to help support young adults as they move through that transition. Christine Telford, many of you may know her. She is the regional representative for Helen Keller National Center. She was not able to be on this meeting today, but she just asked me to share that, you can reach out to any of us to get her contact information. And, she is essentially part of the team as well. The second one that we really want to focus on is the IEP, because it really needs to start at that age. We talk about transition in the law is from 14, through transition age, but we really look and start talking about transition at age 12 and starting to look at the IEP, and that it reflects not only strong an academic program, but also what are those functional skills that the child is going to need for whatever comes after school. And that could be college, that could be employment, that could be, and a variety of different employment options. So we want to start talking about that early, and making sure that the IEP reflects that. Person-centered planning is probably the area that most teams reach out to us around for support. And that's really, looking at with the student and their family and starting to plan again early. It can happen as early as 12. Most teams start looking at that process at around 14. What are the students' strengths? What are their challenges? What kinds of things are they thinking about that they might like to do post-school? And, any of you who have children who are teenagers or beyond, know I certainly do, is that they don't know at 14 what they want to do, but they do have interest in things that can help guide their education options, and then also get the team started to think about what options are for post-school. There are a lot of tools for person-centered planning, and we can share those and also help facilitate that process. Self-advocacy training and support is very important, and there are a lot of resources around that. Of self-advocacy could be everything from a child being able to make a choice between what they're going to wear that day, to what they're going to eat that day, to them actually writing to their legislator and asking for, better access to transportation. So it really runs the gamut. But the point is that we want to build those skills in middle school and high school, so that the student has those skills when they're advocating for themselves, as a young adult and through adulthood. So that's a very important component. And there are quite a few resources out there that we have. And also Helen Keller National Center has a really nice module on actually geared towards young adults and adults who are deafblind in advocacy training. Communication and assistive technology might be like right at the top of the list. If I could probably renumber this, that might come first, because those are two essential components specifically for children who have the combined vision hearing loss. It is probably one of the areas that that NEC is looked towards the most for support around developing a communication, plan for the child, a communication system for a student, and making sure that they know the assistive technology that is needed to get them, again, post-school. Is it college? Is it going to be work? And how is that young adult going to be communicating with the public, and accessing education or things on the job or wherever they're living? So that's an area to really start thinking about, again, as early as possible. It should also be a part of any child's education plan, starting from a young age. And then that vocational activities begin early, and that include community-based experiences. There's research on this. It's very important that students who are deafblind are getting that vocational experience early on. And it also helps them to start learning like what their preferences are and what area they would really like to study or to work in the future. So I'm just looking in the chat. Oh, Terry mentioned that there's a transition, there's a certificate program in Massachusetts at UMass Boston, and it is a great program. So that is a really, I'm glad that you mentioned that as well. So that's a great resource that we have in New England. The transition timeline, NEC is putting together an actual kind of checklist timeline that we will share with all of you as soon as it's more at the formatting, stage. But things to think about. Transition is a continuous process. So by no means is it that, we just focus on IEP transition plan from 12 to 14, and then we forget about it and move on to the next thing. Not at all. It's a cycle. And we revisit all of these things throughout the process because they're all important. But there are things that we want to, if we were setting like an alarm on our iPhone to say like between 12 and 14, we really want to focus and think about that IEP. What are the skills, as we talked about earlier? We want to start thinking about that transition plan and developing the program around some of those areas. Between 14 and 15, we really want to go through the person-centered planning process with the student and with the family and the team, and really gathering that information that's going to help us to develop that transition plan. We're going to revisit that person-centered planning process throughout, however, because as, again, all of us know, who have worked with teenagers or have teenagers, that things change. They're supposed to. They're young, and priorities will change, interests will change, but that's what the person-centered planning process is all about. Between 16 and 18 years, we really want to make sure that students are getting that experience in the community. Are there summer jobs? Are they doing some experiences? We'll talk a little bit about an experience that NEC is going to offer, but that they're getting some vocational experiences so that they know what they're looking for in their post-school experience. If they're a college-bound student, we're also talking during those years of what experiences are they going to look at as well, what they want to major in, getting experiences at maybe a local community college. And then between 18 and 21 is really finalizing and executing that post-school plan. So that's a very rough timeline. And as I said, we can share the checklist timeline, and there are many other resources available online as far as transition timelines as well. Okay, so as far as what NEC can provide around transition and in general. So very briefly, as Tracy mentioned, we're a technical assistance based project. We're funded by taxpayer dollars. So, and we look at our technical assistance and our support in 3 ways, 3 different tiers, and they increase in intensity. Tier 1 is really, we can just provide information and resources. You can just give us a call, email us, get online and say, I would just love if you could give me all the information you have on person-centered planning, and we can send that to you. And that may be all that you need. We also have the website, we have family events, we have our newsletter and our blogs that keep you updated. Our tier 2 consultation is a little bit more specific. Related to transition, you may give us a call and ask us if we have any online courses going on that would support. We could, if there's a transition team, maybe the transition team just needs really one piece, really just maybe some support with person-centered planning, how to do the process. And we can provide that as well. So that's kind of a mid-level of support. Our tier 3 is our intensive consultation and training to teams. And this is something that we work with several teams on currently around transition, helping to support that team, actually helping to implement that person-centered plan, give advice on the IEP, what things to consider, offering training to that team and support to the family. So this is where we essentially are focusing on outcomes related to that particular student or students. you know, in the case of teams that there are some teams, you know, I know at Horace Mann and other schools that are working with several students who are transition age at one time. Our Transition for Success program falls into all of those 3 tiers. So this is a program that we put together for our new grant that really shows our commitment to this transition age group and how we are really thinking specifically how we can support the group. So this is available for students ages 14 to 22. But again, I just want to mention, age 12, reach out to us, age 13, get started as early as possible is our message. So, you know, whereas we might not start implementing the whole person-centered planning process at age 12, we can certainly start talking about it and start planning for it. We have, you can request a transition backpack. We're putting together these really cool Padlets of information around transition. And the nice thing is we can tailor it to what you want. So that's something that you can reach out to us about. We have some, you know, very generic and broad information about transition, but again, we can tailor it to specific things that your team or the child you're working with needs around communication, assistive technology. We can add things to that, share it, and the entire team can access that Padlet, which is just basically an online resource specifically geared towards your team and the individual student. We'll have some webinars related to transition planning, ongoing consultation and training to teams. And that's something, again, reach out to any of us, specifically me, if you're interested in having a further conversation about that about a specific team. And we can include that team on our support on that tier 3 level. We're also very excited about our upcoming PREETS program, and that's pre-vocational training for young adults. PREETS is a program under the Workforce Innovation Act, and it is funding that's available, federal funding that's available to help support actual vocational experiences and support for students around their transition. So this is something that NEC has done in the past. I wasn't personally involved. You know, later on, please, if you have specific questions, Tracy can jump in because she implemented that, and it was a big success. You'll see some photos on the screen of students that were involved in that. And essentially, it involves a few weeks of online learning with the students to kind of get them ready, and then time on the Perkins campus and off the Perkins campus that they will get to experience different kinds of vocational activities based on their interests. So it's a very exciting opportunity for kids to get their feet wet and get some ideas about what they're interested in. Again, I already pretty much talked about this, but for the teams that are interested in that more intensive consultation, any of those areas that we talked about, NEC can support in a variety of different ways. And one that I didn't mention so much, but it's that gap between education and adult service. NEC is in that very unique position to help bridge that gap, because we can stay with the student a little bit longer and help make sure that that connection to adult services happens, working closely again with the Helen Keller National Center rep and the commissions in the different states for vision impairment, hearing impairment, developmental disabilities, all of those agencies. And again, the PREETS youth program that I just mentioned. This is just a quick view into the transition PREETS program that happened in 2021-22. Online, you'll see a lot of young people getting online and getting some support before their time at Perkins, and you know, I think they had a great time and that they learned a lot with that. So With that, I just want to say thank you for being on. We are going to have time for questions and any additional comments. I want to just, the contact information is here. Please reach out to us for any reason. And again, specifically, you can reach out to me to talk about team support, individual support, family support around transition. So with that, I see something in the chat. Oh, and Cherry, so glad you're bringing this back. Yes, we're really excited about the pre-EDS program, and that will be, so reach out about that as well if you know already of any students that would be interested in that. I'd now love to open it up for any questions or comments that anyone has before we close.
Carrie, Kristen, this is Tracy. I just wanted to mention when we were talking earlier, thinking about the kickoff for our transition work, you and I talked about the importance of communication and assistive technology being at the forefront for this population. But also, I mean, that's true of students who are deafblind, but really there's so much evidence coming out now that for all young adults or youth with disabilities, one of the biggest predictors relates to leisure activities and leisure skills, and students being able to engage in things that they enjoy doing, whether it's in their community or whether it's in their home, that having all of those wonderful, rich experiences in their lives really is going to make it or break it. So I can't, that's true of, I guess, all of us, that there are certain things in our lives that we enjoy doing. And when we go long periods of time and we're not able to do them, we don't feel as great. And I think that's true of, the world at large. And thinking about students who are deafblind and the limited access that they have and often isolation, I just think it's more imperative, especially sort of post-COVID, as we're still kind of digging at it out of that world, that we really think about how we can enrich opportunities to explore and engage in different things in the world. So that whole notion of leisure, activities, and access to the community and experiences are really just really critical for this population.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Tracy. Terry, I think I see your hand up.
Right, Tracy, I can't agree with you more on that. That 16 to 18 employment and community experience is the weakest link I find in all of my transition. I have right now 7 transition age students who are all deaf blind, and the weakest link is experience and community employment. And I think that for my students, one of the barriers is that their ASL, their primary language is ASL.
Mm-hmm.
And even with their Helen Keller experience over the summer, they did not have access to ASL completely. And, if we're going to talk deafblind, we also have to talk communication, like you
Absolutely.
said, and honoring their communication method.
Yeah. Thank
Absolutely.
you, Terry. That's such a good point. And that's why, we put it up there as one of the main, topics. I know, that the ASL component is so important. And when students are able to actually meet each other and be able to, young adults and teenagers meet each other and have that connection together to be able to talk is so valuable as well.
Right.
Katie.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
This is Katie speaking. Thank you so much for the presentation. Kristen, I really appreciated how you drove home the point about how the combination of an amount of vision and hearing loss is additive in nature. And as a parent, that hit me so hard the first time that I heard about that from someone at the New England Consortium, because I think we could see our kids' assets in different situations and think we know what's possible for them. And it takes a long time. And for us, it's hitting transition age that we're like, we need more supports here because the potential is huge. But the barriers are invisible to us as sighted and hearing parents without experience in this world. And Dr. Louiselli, what you just added about the predictive nature of whether a person can enjoy their leisure activities hits home so strong for us too, as for the very first time we felt, well, maybe we do count as people who can reach out to our adaptive sports programs. And it has been huge for us to be welcomed, and the like kind of just super creative, let's work this out, let's think together with person-centered, and to find solutions and have a great time has been so helpful. So thank you all. And I wanted to make two kind of asks to put a bee in your bonnet. First, the communication piece is where we're really struggling to find a connection to learning. I really don't want my kid to wait until she's old enough to be eligible for adult services before she can have any kind of tactile communication training. We're trying really hard on our own, but it's not the same as being in direct touch with someone else who's doing it. So like dentist visits are really, really hard for my kid. And now that I can kind of see how the hearing piece and the vision piece are conspiring to leave her rendered senseless, really, during that, maybe it's senseless, or maybe she'd say it's the exact opposite, where she's so overwhelmed she doesn't know what's happening. So I could see for the first time, like, she could really learn something here and she could roll with it. So any opportunities that are available for transition age youth with tactile communication, we're not picky, we would take any form possible. And then my second ask would just be to hope that you keep in your email communications, which is how I know what's happening, letting parents directly know how we can be involved, because we have no support system. Thank goodness we've just been able to be eligible for our Division for the Blind because my daughter turned 14. But if you're homeschooled or in private school in Vermont, there's no access to services through our state TVI agency. So we've been kind of piecing stuff together on our own, which is fine. But it's really hard not to feel like we're in a chute where we'll be directed to the brilliance that your team has to offer and is talking about today. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Katie, so much for sharing that. And please, and please reach out, because, you know, when we talk about a transition team, we're talking about, you know, we're talking about you and supporting you and, you know, bringing that team together. So that is, you know, certainly that's why we're here. So we can definitely, please, you know, send me an email and we can chat and then talk about like what, you know, what's possible.
And Katie, I think that Kristen and I can connect with you and think of some plans, because you're right. I mean, I think it's for students that are homeschooled, it's a totally different world. And it falls on families to really kind of build so many of those bridges. And as you know, a lot of these lead agencies have so much turnover. So we'd be happy to work with you, and I'll make sure that I get in touch with you by the end of this week.
Thanks, everybody. I really
It
appreciate
would
it.
be great. Any other questions or thoughts, or as you're kind of thinking about the students or a child that you may be connected with, are there any particular areas that resonate with any of you here today around transition or transition planning that you're struggling with the most?
I have, you know, all of my students are learning Braille. Some are faster than others. In planning for using technology as part of their, you know, their employment, all of them are touch typists, which is great. But what I need support in is technology training for them around Braille displays. And if there was a summer camp, I mean, I know I can send my other students over to Carroll Center. You know, I don't have the time, or they don't have the time in their day for me to spend that time working on those skill sets, because there's just not enough time in the day if they're going to graduate with a diploma. So, in other cases, I've sent them to, to a facility for 2 weeks during the summer. And they come back and they've learned what they need. And it would be great if there was some way that you could help to support that same thing for the deaf blind students with, especially the ASL users. That's my focus.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Kristen, anything final thoughts, final words?
Yeah, well, one, I just wanted to say, Terry, too, we can talk as well. I have some ideas around that, so I can definitely share with you. Some ideas, so I'll send you an email. So that's it. Is there any other questions or any other comments that anyone would like to make before we end? Well, thank you so much for everyone for being on today. Really appreciate your time, and we're here for you. That's why we're here. So please reach out with questions to get involved for any reason. You will hear back from us right away, and we'll continue, get on the website. We have the newsletter and things like that, but the best way is just to reach out via email, and we can chat with you. So thank you. And I hope everybody has a good afternoon, and hope that Vermont gets a little warmer. We actually I'm in New York. We actually had some flurries here today. So, it's getting
Snow
cold.
is predicted, right, Katie? It's coming in.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
for having
Bye.
us. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Kristen.